All right, so thank you,
Awesome.
John. Feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. And how Amanda said, my name is John Remo Martinez de Jesus, which is a really long name, just like my role here at the Alliance. I'm the bilingual engagement and access coordinator, right? And some of you guys might be wondering, why are we having a presentation on race, ethnicity, and nationality, right? Um, and I'm gonna just give you a little bit of background of what I've done and my work has been. Um, so back in 2020, I worked with Connecticut Department of Public Health with the COVID-19 project. During that project, we hired a team, the community outreach specialist team. It was composed of folks of different racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientation, background. And the idea was that these folks that came from diverse, underrepresented communities would feel comfortable with collecting racial, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation data, right? And what we found out is that although the team was doing a phenomenal job conducting contact tracing, and reaching out to folks and spreading public health information and education, we were not doing the best we could, right, when collecting data around race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. And this is how this presentation came about. This is the first of a three-part presentation. The first presentation is the one that you guys are attending to right now, which is a presentation on race, ethnicity, nationality, and how to best collect this data. The second part would be a presentation on sexual orientation and gender identifying data, and how to collect that data and the best ways to. And then the third presentation, the third part would be how to collect data around um, income or veteran status, and why that data is important and how we use it, right? So after we created this presentation and we used it with the community outreach specialist team, we noticed that the team understood the importance of the questions. We also received positive feedback from all participants, and the data recording drastically improved by 23%, right? So now that we have a little bit of the background about this presentation, where we're actually here, we want to get started. So I'm just going to go to the next slide, which is our agenda. And today we have a lot planned. We will shortly go over some terminology, understand what intersectionality is, and how our multiple identities shape the way that we navigate social structures. Know the difference between race and street race. How are they different from ethnicity and nationality? And we will also understand how minority stress theory creates racial and ethnic disparities, and how to ask race, ethnicity, and nationality questions. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, we will all understand why collecting accurate data is crucial. Okay. In this slide, I would like to ask anyone any terms on the screen that they're not familiar with. Can you guys raise your hand if you see a term that you're not familiar with on the screen? And Amanda, you'll have to help me with that because I don't believe I can see who's raising their hands.
Yeah, no problem. I see Sarah Holmes is the first hand I see. So Sarah, would you like to unmute and let us know which one?
Hi. Yes. Embarrassingly, several of them I am not familiar with. So the NHPI, AIAN, BAME, and URM.
All right. So NHPI, which is Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, it's just an acronym that you would see. AIAN is also an acronym for American Indian and Alaskan Native. And these are questions that these are answers that you would usually words that you would usually see in research paperwork. BAME. Also, you also see it in research paperwork, which is Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, and URM is underrepresented minority. Does anyone else do not recognize any other words on the screen? Perfect. And now this is just a small video. I think this is a great video, and it does a great justice on explaining the difference between race, ethnicity, and nationality.
Race, ethnicity, and nationality are three terms that get thrown around a lot, and all too often they're used interchangeably, ignored, or just used incorrectly. But each of these words actually has a very distinct meaning, and I'm going to talk about them today using my favorite candy, jelly beans. Let's start with race. Now, you may have heard someone say, race is a human construct, and that's true. Race is a mode of categorization that's based on physical appearance. So in the case of jelly beans, race is color. Because race is based on appearance, to some degree it's ascribed, meaning that people are assigned into racial categories based on what other people see. Even if somebody could be mistaken for a certain racial category, it can still apply to them. These categories are fluid, and our ideas of racial groupings change all the time. It's also important to remember that a person can have parents with two different racial backgrounds. The population of the world is becoming increasingly mixed. But even a person with multiple races will still ultimately belong to a racial category themselves, whether or not it's the same as their parents. Race is a huge factor in daily life, but it isn't the whole picture. The term race does not capture the complexities of ethnicity. Ethnicity refers to the ethnic group or groups that a person belongs to. It's a part of a person's heritage and ancestry. In the case of jelly beans, ethnicity is like the flavor. Two people who are in the same racial group can still have very different ethnicities. For example, all of these are red, but this one is cinnamon and this one is cherry. Two people in the same racial group can and often do have very different backgrounds. It's important to note that there are some groups who are unable to trace their specific ethnic heritage because of things like slavery, assimilation, and genocide. Ethnicity is a huge part of identity formation and development, but it's still not the same as nationality. The word nationality refers to someone's national origin, the country where they hold citizenship. For jelly beans, it's like the bag that a bean comes from. People of the same race or ethnicity can come from all different nations, like the watermelon bean that's in Camo Mix and Kids Mix, or the lemon lime bean that's in all three. And nationality is flexible. If a person immigrates, their nationality can change. People can have dual citizenship or sometimes no citizenship at all. So, now you know. As a quick recap, race is a mode of categorization based on physical appearance, like the color of a jelly bean. Ethnicity is a person's actual ethnic background based on their ancestry, like the flavor of a jelly bean. And nationality is the place where a person holds citizenship, which is like the jelly bean's bag. Now that you know the difference, you can have a much more comprehensive conversation about identity issues. Thanks for watching! I hope you enjoyed this video because I totally enjoyed eating these jelly beans afterwards.
So Elena in the last video did a phenomenal job at explaining the difference between nationality, ethnicity, and race, right? And basically she says how nationality is the citizenship status, right? What country your status belongs to. And she also did a good job at explaining how folks can have dual citizenship, so they might have nationality in two different places, or they might not hold any nationality at all, right? She also did a great job at explaining what ethnicity is. And basically ethnicity is your flavor, right? The person's culture, what food you eat, what customs you hold, language, religious, spiritual practices, and your race. Eliana explains that it's a set of physical characteristics or ancestral background, right? So when speaking about race, it's important to understand that there's two categories, right, of race of race that we speak about. So the first category will be your ancestral background. Where do your ancestors come from? What practices you practice, what spirituality you still hold dear to you. And then the other would be street race, right? Street race would be your hair texture, skin color, facial characteristics. And it's important to understand that there's an either or, and both are still real. She also explained how race is something that you can identify with, or is something that can also be assigned to you. Does that make sense to everyone? That whole race piece? Awesome. Has anyone heard about the phrase or term street race before? You can just speak up.
No, I haven't.
No?
I see some no's in the chat as well, saying I've never heard it before. No, 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 no.
Okay. So before we go on to the next slide, or as I'm transitioning to the next slide, a street race is a concept coined by sociologist Nancy Lopez. All right. And her research began after seeing her three cousins, all Dominican with the same Hispanic last name, looking for an apartment during the same time, right? So they all identify as Latino, they all had the same last name, they all spoke Spanish, and some of them even received callbacks from Latino landlords, right? But she noticed that the cousin with the darkest skin or more African or Black features was always told that the apartment was either already rented or they couldn't go forward with for whatever reason, right? And that made her investigate this, right? And she, again, she's gonna do a greater job at explaining what street race is and how it actually shapes the way that we ask the question around race and ethnicity. And again, this is Nancy Lopez, and let's see if you guys can hear this video better. If you guys can't, then Kelsey, do you mind playing it on your end? Let's try it.
Bienvenidos. Welcome. My name is Nancy Lopez, and I'm professor of sociology at the University of New Mexico. I also direct and co-founded the Institute for the Study of Race and Social Justice. Today, I wanted to share with you one of the research projects that I've been working on for a couple of years, and it has to do with the work of making sure that our data collection allow us to identify inequalities. So I've done a lot of work with the 2020 census and also included a new measure of race that I call street race. And you can see the poster behind me. And at least 2 articles were published using this measure in a survey of Latinos, Hispanics here in the United States with about 1,500 participants. And it basically asked those participants to answer the following question: what's your street race? If you were walking down the street, what race do you think strangers would assume you were based on what you look like? The beauty of this question is that it challenges the myth of race as biology, genetic ancestry, culture, ethnicity, and instead focuses on race as a master social status and also a relationship of power that is not just about your personal identity. Our research shows that when you use the street race measure in studies about inequality, you make visible inequities that would remain hidden if we only asked about how you identify. It's always important to include at least 2 questions when you're asking about race. First, how do you identify? That's important. But also, how do you think others see your race? Equally important is making sure that you mark 1 box when asked about your street race. Think about why President Obama marked only 1 box in the 2010 census and the civil rights use of that data to detect housing, health, and employment discrimination. If President Obama were walking down the street looking for an apartment, or if he showed up in an emergency room with symptoms of appendicitis, do you think anyone would think he's white? Thank you, and I look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully one day, and always feel free to reach out.
Beautiful. All right, so how Nancy Lopez explained the concept of street race is if you're Latina, or you don't even have to identify as Hispanic or Latina, if you're walking down the street, what race would a stranger assign you? This forces you to think outside of your own self-assigned identity and look at yourself through the world's eyes. All right. And this kind of gives us an idea of what we're really asking when we are asking for someone's race, right? Or how they identify their race. What we're really asking is, how has systemic racism and prejudice impacted you? All right. Nancy's research shows how Black, Indigenous, and Latina people of color experience racism different than their white Hispanic counterparts, regardless of their Latina identity. Although they both might endure the same prejudice and biases due to their language, spiritual practices, rituals, clothing, customs, and other cultural similarities, they still have different advantages and barriers when navigating systems and social structures due to their physical characteristics. And the reason for that is because there's currency in whiteness. Black Latina people also experience racism from other white Latina people, right? When interviewing a person that might not entirely understand the race question, even if not Hispanic, it's important to remember to keep the street race concept in mind and try to shape the question in a way that makes them observe themselves outside of their own self-proclaimed identity. Although race relates to ancestral background, when answering the race question on forms, you're actually documenting what your physical characteristics are. Your hair texture, your skin color, physical characteristics, etc. Does anyone have any questions about street race or how to ask? Awesome. We have a very talkative audience today.
I'm sure people are digesting.
Right.
The questions will come.
Awesome. All right. So now that we're all experts, right, on race, ethnicity, and nationality, right, because nobody has questions, we're gonna play a little game. So the game is, whoever wants to go first, since we have very interactive audience, just read the fact and let's see if we can identify the race, ethnicity, and nationality of the individual that belongs to this statistic. And I'll go first, right? So according to the 2020 census, 50.7% of Brazilian population identifies as preto or Black. All right. So someone belonging to this statistic, their nationality would be Brazilian. Their ethnicity would be Latino or Hispanic, and their race would be Black. Who would want to read the second statistic?
I'll try it.
Awesome. Go ahead,
15%
Mike.
of Peru's population have at least some Japanese ancestry. Alberto Fujimori, former Peruvian president, is of Japanese ancestry. So 15% of Peru's population have at least some Japanese ancestry. So the nationality is Peruvian, guessing, right? Because they're in the population of Peru. And their ethnicity.
By the way, Alberto Fujimori, that's the gentleman to the right. So if you're looking at that guy on the street, right, what race would you assign to him?
I'd say he was Asian.
Beautiful. And what's their ethnicity if their nationality is Peruvian?
Their ethnicity could be Hispanic or Japanese, I guess. I mean, their ethnicity could be.
You had it right. Their ethnicity is Hispanic Latino, their race is Asian, and their nationality is Peruvian.
So we have a hand raised by Casey Fisher. If you'd like to unmute and let us know what your question is.
So I've heard a lot of differing views on what race really can be defined as. Some people say it's just something that's Black or white, and then folks of different ethnicities fall into those. But we're saying like that the races are like Black, Caucasian, Hispanic, Pacific Islander, Asian, like how are we or is race just up to the person? I'm confused on how we're supposed to determine how many different forms of race. Also, of course, there's mixed race folks too as well. So that's my question.
Yep, and for the mixed race part of your question, we'll get to that later on the presentation. But yeah, the race would be Black, white, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native, Indian. That would be your race, and your ethnicity would be Latino or Hispanic. And that's just the way that we're asking the question. Usually the way that the question is asked is what race do you identify with? And those are the options that we have. And then the second part of the question is, do you identify as Hispanic Latino? And that's how we're documenting the ethnicity. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so just to clarify, what race would a Hispanic or Latino person be? Or is that dependent? That so they can be Black or white?
Someone that may identify as Hispanic or Latino, they can identify as, how we're looking at these statistics, they can identify as having Japanese ascendancy, or they can identify their race as being white. They can identify their race as being Black. They can identify their race as being American Indian. Just because you're Latino or Hispanic doesn't exclude you from belonging to any of those races.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yep, no.
Can I jump? I just want to interject
Yes.
for a section for like the purpose of this exercise too. I think what we're kind of like practicing or utilizing right now in this moment is more street race.
Yep.
By like, right, because we're looking at Alberto Fujimori and kind of selecting where we think he would fall. But if we were to ask him himself, like he might not click Asian as if we did. He might, in addition to other things too. But that's kind of like what we're doing.
Yep, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
Mhm. And who would like to read the last statistic and try to see how good they are with race, ethnicity, nationality?
I'll give it a go. According to the U.S. Department of State, 97% of Argentina's population identify as white. So the nationality would be Argentinian, because we're talking about Argentina, correct?
Nope.
Yes, okay. And the race would be white. In ethnicity, I suppose if we're talking about Argentina, that would be Hispanic or Latino. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, see, we're masters. We're masters at this. So, and the reason why it's important for us to ask these questions is because if we don't ask these questions, then we're erasing folks that have been historically overlooked and underserved, right? When we look at statistics here in the United States, we know that 3% of Asian Americans living in the United States identify as Asian Latino, which is more than 4 million people. 78% of Connecticut's residents identify as white. Out of those 78%, 14.5% of those residents also identify as Hispanic. Nearly 3 million American Indian or Alaskan Native people were classified as having Latina or Hispanic ethnicity. So to the previous question, yes, you can be Latino or Hispanic and also identify your race as Asian or American Indian or white or Black, because race has, when we're asking the race question, we're not really asking about your ancestral background. What we're asking is, how do you show up in the world, and how has racism or oppression impacted your lived experience in this country?
We have a question in the chat.
Mhm.
Kara, there are no silly questions, but
No.
the question is, are Latino/Hispanic the only ethnicities one could identify as?
Ooh, I don't believe so. I think this is the only ethnicity that we are recording in the census and where we're asking these questions.
Yeah, and just to chime in again too, like if you were to look in other countries, like the UK, for example, like you'll notice that their race, ethnicity, demographic questions look different than the US one, but the ones that John's talking about today are through the US Census.
Yep, today's presentation is just so you understand how to ask the questions we ask and what we are asking when we ask these questions, right? Because they can be a bit complicated. And again, if we don't ask these questions, we are erasing or not valuing folks that have been historically overlooked and underserved. Some ethnic or racial disparities we can see here is that multiracial men reported lifetime contact of sexual violence at a rate of 31.9% compared to their white counterparts, which was 16.5%. According to the National Black Women's Justice Institute, 41% of Black women experience sexual coercion and other forms of unwanted sexual contact. Also, in the 2021 LGBTQ plus Connecticut Needs Assessment, we found that Hispanic LGBTQ plus individuals make up about 41% of LGBTQ plus sexual violence survivors, followed by Black LGBTQ plus folks at 40% and multiracial at 35%. And these disparities, folks, this is not by accident. These are results of systemic oppression and just ways that people have been forced to navigate through these social systems and political systems, right? And multiple identities. Let's see. So on this slide, we're going to be talking a little bit about multiple identities or intersectional identities. So the study of multiple identities or intersectionality was started by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, right? And her investigation started after a woman, which was Emma DeGriffith, sued General Motors in 1976 after being denied employment, right? And Emma was suing General Motors because General Motors was hiring Black men for heavy lifting jobs, right? And white women for clerical jobs. And Black women were hired last and fired first, right? And why this case is important is because Emma actually lost her court case because the court said that racial and sexual discrimination cannot be intersected, right? We all have certain advantages and disadvantages depending on our family status, disability, socioeconomic status, nationality, race, gender, religion, language, age, sexual orientation, occupation, education, and so on, right? And intersectionality helps us understand how a person's combination of social and political identities combine to create different discriminations and privileges. Basically, the closer you are to stigma, the further you are from resources and the more stress you go through. Anybody has any questions about this slide? Okay. And minority stress theory can be used to explain how every social and political system has a group with minority status, let it be race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, disability, class, and belonging to that minority group assigns the person a minority identity. So for example, in race, a minority group would be a person that's Black, ethnicity, Latina, sexual orientation, it might be LGBTQ plus, religion might be Muslim, disability can be HIV positive, class, poverty, or bad in a bad neighborhood. And minority stress theory, what it explains is that folks that belong to minority groups or identify with more minority groups. So for example, someone that might be a person of color that identifies also as Latina, that is also LGBTQ plus, that might be HIV positive. This person is experiencing external stress, which might look like violence, work discrimination, social messaging, religious exclusion, victimization, peer rejection, stigmatizing policies, just trauma, right, from the community. And in turn, that person is also experiencing internal stress, which looks like concealment, internalized hate, impulsivity, rejection, emotion, dysregulation, on assertiveness, right? And minority stress theory shows us how external stress in combination with the internal stress can result in low self-esteem, poor mental health, such as depression, anxiety, suicide, risky behaviors such as sex work, drug use, violent act, adverse physical health like strokes, heart attacks, obesity, low socioeconomic status, incarceration, poor social support, lack of boundaries, lack of connection, re-victimization, and partner abuse. Does anybody have any questions about the minority stress theory? And this is why it's important to collect this, the race, ethnicity, and nationality data. And this is because racial and ethnic data helps us understand the inequalities faced by different ethnic groups. Local, tribal, state, and federal programs use this data as crucial factor in the basic research behind numerous policy, particularly for civil rights. Data is also used in planning and funding government programs that provide funds or services for specific groups. Having accurate demographic data is also crucial to help red flag potential inequalities and barriers when we then separate the data versus looking at it when it's combined. It helps us understand where limited resources should be allocated, such as human, financial, and material resources. So whenever we're looking at statistics and we see that, for example, COVID-19 or HIV or sexual violence is impacting folks of color at a higher rate, it's not by accident, it's because of that minority stress theory. And it just shows us how important it is for us to collect this data so we can make the changes for that population, right? And in this slide, we're going to be discussing why some interviewers might have discomfort while collecting this data, and some interviewers might have discomfort while collecting the data because they might feel like it's offensive. They might feel like the question might be too personal or inappropriate, and this might cause a person to feel offended, right? Other interviewers might feel like they feel like there's internal conflict or discomfort with the question. They don't feel comfortable asking this question. Some folks might feel like they don't have the skills. If they do ask the question and there is discomfort, if there is the person feel offended, how do I treat the situation, right? Some folks might feel like they don't know why the question is important. They might feel like the question is unnecessary or that it's silly, right? And if it's because you're afraid of offending someone or afraid of conflict, or you feel like you don't have the right skills, or you don't feel like the question is necessary, most of the time this looks like the interviewing rushing through the questions, not asking the questions, or even if the person comes off like they don't know what they're being asked, the interviewer, instead of describing what the question is or explaining the question, the interviewer just skips it, right? And in reality, there has been research when it comes to studying if people feel uncomfortable with these questions, right? For example, the NOVA Southeastern University study, they did research and with 115 patients, and only 1.74% felt uneasy answering the race, ethnicity, and nationality questions. And that 1.74% that felt uneasy with the questions were actually two white women. It was not anyone belonging to any minority group that felt uneasy with the question. There was also another study done at St. Michael's Hospital Academic Family Health Research, where we found actually 0 patients reported discomfort when it came to answering race, ethnicity, or nationality questions, right? Patients reported different interpretations of the question. Some believe that the nationality question was referring to their parental origin or ancestry. So they believe that when people were asking about their nationality question, we were asking where were your parents born? And that's not necessarily the case. The case is where to what country does your citizenship belong to, right? And others believe that the ethnicity question referred to a place of birth or upbringing, like where did you grow up? And that's not what we're asking you when we're asking about your ethnicity. We're basically asking you if you're Latino or Hispanic. Also, many patients appreciated being able to select from a variety of specific responses instead of just having a limited response of race, such as white and Black. And these are 6 easy steps. This is a tool that was created for interviewers. And this is, if you follow these 6 steps and have 0 fear, the person will not feel uncomfortable with you asking the question. And more than not, they will answer the question for you. All right. And the first step is normalize the question. Second step is explain the importance of the question. Let them know what we're going to be using this information for. That way they're not assuming or making up stories in their head about what this information is going to be used for, right? Ask in a natural, non-judgmental tone. Number 4, ask open-ended questions. 5 is mark all of the options they choose. And number 6, allow opting out, right? And how does this look like, right? So, and I'm going to be looking for a
We have
volunteer.
a question actually for
sorry.
number 2.
Sorry.
Marisol, would you like to elaborate your question?
Yeah, how do you explain what the importance of the question is? What would you say to somebody who
I was
wants
just
to
going
that?
to the next one. Marisol, so the next slide, Marisol, since we're already having this conversation and you're already you're volunteering, do you mind reading this example for the team? This is how you would
Sure. I would like to ask some personal information now. These questions are asked to all of our clients. Feel free to opt out of answering any of these questions. They allow us to better understand our clientele and identify which communities are most at need of our resources and support. Please remember that anything that we speak about today is completely confidential and stays between us. Can I ask?
awesome. So when you did that, Marisol, you followed all the 6 steps, which is normalize the question. You told them that this is a question that we ask everybody. You explain the importance of the question. You let them know that this question that I'm asking you is so we can understand what populations or how we can better service you, right? And you also ask in a neutral, non-judgmental tone. You ask in an open-ended question. At the end, you ended it with, can I ask? Mark all of the questions they choose and allow option out. You let them know that this, anytime during this conversation, you want to opt out, you can. But this isn't, you don't have to ask verbatim this way, but this is just an example of something that you may say that normalizes the question, lets them know why we are asking, letting them know the reason behind it, and giving them the option of opting out whenever they want. Does anybody have any questions about this example or has a suggestion?
I'm just eager to get to like the mixed race situations, right? People who don't have who we may not have a box for.
And how do you ask in a neutral, non-judgmental approach? You don't make any assumptions of the individual. For example, if somebody comes in and they might look like me, right? And they tell you that their race is white, it's not our job to correct them. It's not our job to have a conversation with them. It's our job to collect the information. They might be mixed race, right? And their lived experience, although we're trying to collect how has racism impacted them, the racism might impacted them different, right? They might have experienced racism differently. And if they say white, you collect white. Try not to project any discomfort you have onto the individual. So if you are uncomfortable with the question, 9 out of 10, the person's gonna feel uncomfortable with the question. So just understand that this is a question that we ask everybody. This is a question that's actually helping our agency, and just keep that mindset, right? Many people are grateful to have options that are inclusive and representative of themselves and their family members. It's okay for individuals not to understand the question. If you do encounter someone that does not understand the question, it's good to have that street race mentality and try to ask them in a way that makes them see themselves outside of their own identity, the identity that they gave themselves. Does anybody know what an open-ended approach is? Awesome. Marisol, do you want to share?
No, give somebody else a turn.
Can somebody else share, please?
Can you please repeat the question?
Does anybody know what an open-ended approach is?
Oh, I see a hand raised. Unless Sarah would like to speak. Otherwise.
I'll say Lindsay, because I haven't heard from Lindsay. And what's up, Lindsay?
John?
Yes.
So I would say an open-ended approach is just not asking yes or no questions, asking questions that give people a lot of space to expand on their answers.
Awesome. Yes, Lindsay. Yes. So open-ended questions, these are some examples, right? So instead of asking, are you Black? Right? Which that just gives the person a yes or no, the option, it gives the person the option to just choose yes or no. You want to ask, how do you describe your race, right? Or how would you identify your ethnicity? Now, are you Latino, right? Are you Black or white? Another example is, what is your nationality? Allow them to just answer with options. If you sense any hesitation when asking the race question, please read through the options, all right? So example, if you're asking a Latino or Hispanic person what their race is, and they answer with, I identify as Latino, that's it. That's my race. What do you mean? Right? You might want to ask in a different way. How do you think others that might not know you see your race? As Black, white, American Indian, Asian, Pacific Islander, or other, right? And to answer that question, Marisol's question, if someone answers that they identify with 2 or more races, you check off 2 or more, right? You do not check off white, Black, Asian. You just check off 2 or more. That's the option, I believe, right, Amanda? That's
So, yeah.
for race. When we're asking folks for race, it gives us 5 racial characteristics, and then it says 2 or more, then it says other, and then it says refuse to answer. So if somebody answers with more than 1 race, you just check off 2 or more. Any questions on this? And recording data correctly. So it's important to choose, it's important to answer other if the person that you're interviewing answers with other. Do not answer the question with the race you assign to them. So let's say if somebody walks into the door and they might appear to you like someone that is Asian, and you ask for their race and they say other, do not, just because you're assigning the race of Asian to that person, do not check off Asian. You check off other and you write in the option that they give you. So for example, if they say my race is not an option and I identify as Chicano, or I identify as mulatto, or I identify as Jewish, that's my race, then you would check other and you will write in Jewish, Chicano, mulatto, using the words they use. You would never, let's say if they say Chicano, you're not going to check off other and write Mexican American. You're going to write whatever words they use to describe themselves. Any questions on this slide? Beautiful. And I think we did better than expected. We actually have 5 minutes.
Well, actually like
No,
35.
35 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you guys have any questions, suggestions, anything you guys didn't feel like writing in the comment box, feel free to unmute and let's have a conversation.
There is a question in the chat from Kara. How do you suggest collecting this type of data for groups? For example, when we are providing programs in schools where we don't have the time/option for a sign-in to collect this data. So from the context of this question, I think this is coming from a prevention educator, or at least people doing programs in schools. But yes, that is the question. How do you suggest collecting this type of data for groups of people?
Like instead of like if you're like
Instead of like a one-on-one.
like if you're not having a one-on-one conversation, it's just like explaining it to the group.
Yes, and other folks seem to have the same question. So I guess just some ideas.
I would say first, like how I said, set up the question. Let them know that this question we ask everybody and the importance of the question, why we're asking, and kind of setting it up in a street race kind of way. You know, if somebody, what we're asking you right now is if someone that didn't know you would see you in the street, what race would they assign to you? Asking in a way that makes them kind of think about it outside of their own identity.
Hi, John. I just wanted to expand on my question. Sorry, just to provide some clarification. So we are one of the member centers of the Alliance, and I know I have some colleagues on the call that do similar prevention work. So when we go into schools, we provide education programs on, healthy relationships, consent, boundaries, things like that. So these are to groups of students anywhere from pre-K age all the way to 12th grade. So when we're providing those programs, we want to collect data on the number of participants in the classroom, the age of the participants in the classroom, et cetera. But how would you suggest going about collecting? Because obviously we can't make any assumptions about the, students and participants in the room, but we also are limited in that we can't always, have a conversation, like collecting the data, since we were in there for maybe, 40 minutes maximum teaching a program. And I don't know, would you suggest like trying to have a sign-in sheet where they can check off this kind of data, or, what would be your thoughts and suggestions on that?
I would suggest that, yeah, maybe a sign-in sheet where they can write in their own race, ethnicity. Usually nationality questions are not asked unless your residential status is important. But as far as like race and ethnicity, just ask them. I even if they're young, people are very aware about what the race and ethnicity is. And it's always good to have folks self-identify instead of assuming.
Okay, would you suggest any difference in phrasing? Because I mean, if we're handing out, sometimes, like I said, our programs are for, as young as like 4 years old or so. I don't know that they can necessarily read and write to that capacity yet. What would you suggest for those kind of age groups?
Maybe that's something, maybe that's a conversation that you and I can have separate, and maybe we can brainstorm on how to, unless somebody else has a similar question.
Well, can I just jump in, John?
Yeah.
Kara and others who are asking, because Sarah, I see you're asking too, and Linda, so are you. So I guess I'm curious as to like who's asking for this data, because I know we aren't. And so do you want to have it for your own organizations and your own knowledge? And then what would you like to do with the information? Because I guess my question about asking for groups is like, if do you have a reason to need the information? Like, what is the kind of context, and what will you do with having that information? I would err on the side. I agree with John. I think a lot of kids are very aware, although I would think back to my almost 4-year-old and my 7-year-old, and I do not think either of them would know how to answer questions like that. So I think there's, okay, Sarah, you need the demographic info on groups for CCDB. Interesting. Honestly, I would go back to the people asking you to collect this kind of data and ask them how they would like you to collect it. I think I think collecting with groups is really complicated, especially with kids. And unless the school is going to provide you with some of that data, you have limited time in those spaces. Yeah. Kelsey just said the same thing. Like, you could pull it from the schools themselves, but that's tricky. And I think, like John said, you can, for older groups, you could totally create a sign-in sheet. I think for little kids, you could maybe ask for, like Kelsey's saying, and like I said, through the school themselves, but asking the kids to reflect on it might be a bigger conversation, which I think you could have with them. And it could be part of your education session, and that would be a great conversation, I think, to have with John. I think just doing it solely just to collect the data without actually integrating it into a conversation about intersectionality, even at a young age, might be complicated. Sorry, I'm gonna stop talking.
No, that's great, and that's why I was like, maybe Kara and I can talk outside after this presentation, because there's a lot of components. Do you see any other questions, Amanda?
There's some comments going in through the chat. So this one says from Dominique, some of the school systems give some pushback with providing the demographic info of the classes. So it usually results in our educators collecting this info in each classroom. So yeah. So of course, this may depend on what systems you're working with and being able to gather this information. But yeah, we've definitely put our heads together and try to brainstorm some ways of collecting the data. But of course, always like trying to think of that important question of how are we going to use this information to hopefully improve what we're doing? Because ultimately, right, these questions are being gathered because we are trying to find communities of people who are being not treated as fairly or discriminated against. So we want to be mindful of like the purpose and the goal of gathering this information.
And maybe that's more work that needs to be done in order for us to collect this data. But the purpose of the presentation is so you guys can understand the reason behind it, the importance behind it, and what we're really asking when we're asking these questions. But yeah, I think that there's way more work that needs to be done. Yeah.
Are there any other questions for John? Or any parts of the presentation? We got loads of time, so don't feel like.
Oh yeah, we have a lot of time.
We got a lot of time. Or any thoughts, any comments you'd like to make?
Or any questions about how I mentioned this is a 3-part presentation, which is the first one is race, ethnicity, and nationality. The second one is going to be around sexual orientation and gender identifying. And then lastly, we're just going to bring it all together. And we're just going to be speaking about those uncomfortable questions around money and finances and veteran. So you guys have any questions about those upcoming presentations?
I also added in just a last reminder for the sign-in sheet and also our evaluation for today's training. We would greatly appreciate if you can give us feedback on what you think, any sort of suggestions for the future. Please let us know. So that's in the chat as well. But I will now be quiet so that you can ask John questions.
And if you guys don't have any questions, that's okay. I do invite you to continue doing your own education. It's a never ending. Terms are always changing, and things are always changing too. So just if you wanna do some research on what street race is, right, or what intersectionality is, right, feel welcome to do that on your own time.
I also just want to read some of the comments you got, John. So Sarah writes, John, this was really helpful overview. Thank you. And Melissa says, thank you. This was a great training. I think sometimes we're doing such sensitive work that timing is everything when to ask these questions.
I know sometimes we only have like a few minutes with our client, and we have to ask these uncomfortable questions. But I really believe that if we set it up, if we let the client know that, hey, we ask these questions to everybody and the importance behind it and how we're going to use it, and we give them the option of opting out, it's all about setting up the question and feeling comfortable with it, right? And really understanding that if you're uncomfortable, that's what really translates to them being uncomfortable, right?
We got a hand raised from Jesse.
Awesome.
John, to follow up on Melissa's question, can you share any experiences you have outside of COVID where you've had to ask these questions in a sensitive work experience where it might be sensitive because the work you're doing is sensitive? So how have you asked the questions in those spaces?
All right, so outside of COVID, I worked with HIV and STI and all these projects, right? And I found that it doesn't matter if you're working with COVID-19 or sexual violence or HIV, just race and ethnicity is a very sensitive topic, right? And I usually try to get it out of the way just in the initial conversation. And I think maybe it's just my charisma or my personality that helps me with it. That I'm just like, hey, how are you? Blah, 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 this your name. And before we go any further, I just have to ask you some uncomfortable questions, but these are questions that are going to help me identify folks in the community that need my help, right? And you might feel uncomfortable. If you feel uncomfortable at any point, let me know and I'm going to stop. All right. And it's just about, I think it's just the charisma, knowing why you're asking and just using your tools, right? Because everybody got their own personality, quirkiness, right? And like tapping into that. And hey, I know they are uncomfortable, acknowledging that they are uncomfortable, right? And say, hey, these are uncomfortable, yet necessary, because this is how you are going to help us, right? Once they hear that their answers are going to be helping us improve the systems that they're navigating, they want to help out. They want to help out naturally, right? So it's just explaining to them why is this important, what we're going to use it for, and anytime you can opt out. This is not, don't feel any pressure. And they feel like, okay, I have that autonomy, I have that power of pulling out whenever I want to. And that actually makes them want to help us. Hopefully I answer your question, Jesse. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, I really thought y'all were just gonna come for me today. I was wrong. Hopefully you guys will have more questions when we speak about sexual orientation and gender identifying questions.
And again, I just put in the sign-in sheet and the evaluation in the chat. I'm also gonna, Melanie has a raised hand. But after questions, I can also stop recording in case there's any folks that would like to answer the question without being recorded. Totally fine.
Melanie.
I just have a quick question. So essentially what we're learning in this training, because this is what I'm getting, I don't know if this is what's supposed to be coming across, but if someone doesn't answer the question, we're basically going to be assuming what their race is based off of the street race.
No, if someone opts out, you check off that they opted out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. If someone opts out, you check off they opted out, and that's it. You don't answer the question. You never assume. You never check off whatever race you assign to them. Nope. You just opt out.
I think the concept around like street race, I think is to help us kind of understand how to interpret the race question in case folks ask us like, well, I don't really know what to click. It's like, well, how do you feel like the world views you? And of course, like someone might still identify with something that doesn't necessarily go in line with how maybe the world might view them. And that's totally okay. Like you will go ahead and click whatever that person chooses and go with that. Like don't stray from that. But I think, yeah, the street race is just to help us like kind of shape how we view race, how we're explaining these questions to folks, and then we'll let them choose. So. And Delta says, thank you, John. It's a great way to foster trust and understanding with clients / the community.
Yes. And Amanda, I didn't know if you wanted to maybe pause the recording in case somebody wants to ask a question without being recorded.
Yes, I'm going to stop the recording.